Baseball isn't just a game, it's a reflection of America itself. And nowhere is that more true than in small towns and cities, where the sport isn't just played, it's part of the community's identity. This week, I sit down with author Will Bardenwerper to talk about his new book, where we dive into what baseball means to small town life, the challenges these communities face, and why their fight to keep the game alive matters now more than ever. Today, on Rounders, a history of baseball in America. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Rounders, a history of baseball in America. I'm your host, Jeff Lambert. I'm honored today to be joined by Will Bardenwerper, who's the host of Homestand, Small Town Baseball and the Fight for the Soul of America. We're going to be talking about that relationship between small towns and baseball, and really the heart, I think, of how the two are synergistic with each other. So, Will, thank you for taking the time to come on the show.
Oh, no, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Before we jump into it, I'd like to give you the opportunity. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background as a journalist and what got you involved in doing a book related to baseball.
Well, you may get more than you bargained for with that question, because I took a very circuitous route to where I ended up. Maybe I should just back up very quickly. I was in New York on 9/11 as a financial analyst, which led me to leave that profession to join the military, where I served as an infantry officer for about 4.5 years before getting out of the military, going to grad school, working at the Pentagon as a civilian for 5 years. And I did all of this before I had ever published or written anything. And then that's when I made a major career pivot to writing. And I wrote one book, which I think, did reasonably well and continued. I've been writing ever since then. That was about 10 years ago. This story was inspired by when I first found out about major league contraction of the minor leagues. And I remember reading initially there were rumors, it wasn't confirmed, but there were rumors floating that MLB was targeting, up to 25% of the minor league teams to eliminate them. And I thought to myself, I don't think that's going to end well for these towns that have often, in many cases, hosted major league affiliates for a century. And so my initial story idea was going to be to tell the story of the final season of the Appalachian League, which was one of the leagues that was slated for elimination. And we actually had a book contract ready to go to do that. And then, as fate would have it, COVID happened. The rumors kind of began like a month before COVID sort of began in earnest in, the winter, January of like 2020, let's say. And, one thing led to another, and that minor league season was completely canceled. The first season that had been canceled in, probably 100 years as well. And, so, all of a sudden there was no season, therefore there was really no book, because the book was going to be me, embedding with this team and telling the story of this final season. And the community ultimately didn't even get a chance to say goodbye, because contraction then did happen. The team was eliminated without having a final season. So that was sort of the origin of where this book came about.
And you decided to focus your book on this small town in New York. It's home to a minor league club called the Batavia Muck Dogs. What drew you into this community to chronicle this particular story?
Sure. So anyway, the first thing I had to do was determine, well, now that there is no season, I still think that this is a really important story that needs to be told, the elimination of all these teams. And so luckily I was able to sort of salvage the initial research and work I had been doing in the form of an article for Harper's Magazine, which told the story of what the Appalachian League had been historically and kind of what had been lost, even though I didn't have a chance to go to the games because there were none. As fate would have it, though, I got some really wonderful feedback from baseball fans across America that read that story, and they said it really resonated and it reminded them of the clubs in their respective towns. One of whom was this gentleman named Bill Kaufman from Batavia, New York, who happened to be a writer as well. And he said, Will, I love this story. Everything you wrote about the Appalachian League reminded me so much of our minor league team that had been part of the New York Penn League, which was also eliminated at the same time. And he's like, I'd love to meet you. You should come up here, and it'd just be fun to talk and share stories. He lived I live outside Pittsburgh. He lived in about 4 hours away. So I said, sure, I'd love to come meet with you. He sounded like a super nice guy. And when I got up there, he started introducing me to, a few of his buddies who he had gone to these games with. And one thing kind of led to another. And I thought to myself, you know what? Um, you know, this seems like a fascinating little ecosystem. And what they had done was they had replaced this minor league team that they had been stripped of and replaced it with a collegiate summer wood bat team. And so he said, maybe you can come to the ballpark with us and go to some of these games and, tell the story of not only the death of baseball in Batavia, but this sort of rebirth of baseball in a new form. And that's what gave rise to this book that I ended up writing.
So you have the Muck Dogs facing contraction, like you said, which is happening to a lot of other MILB teams across the country. But something different happened here. The residents of Batavia came together. They stood up and said they wanted to keep this club operating. Can you give us a snapshot of how the residents came together to keep baseball alive in their town?
Sure. So it was led by the gentleman who became the owner of this team, Robbie Nichols and his wife. He's a Canadian, actually, a former minor league hockey player, kind of a tough guy. He spent a lot of time in the penalty box over the years. And now he's just a hustling entrepreneur. He had run a few minor league hockey teams. And now he's in the baseball, the amateur baseball business. And so he approached the city council there and said, hey, I've been running this team in Elmira with a lot of success. Would you be willing to have me stand up this collegiate team here in Batavia? We think there's obviously a strong fan base because there's all the people that used to go to the minor league games that are now hungering for a continuation of baseball. And so he was the one, kind of the economic driver of it. And then the fans, I think, were desperate for something to fill this void that had been left in their lives when the minor league Muck Dogs were taken from them. And so they really embraced this new team and that the charismatic owner of it who was determined to do the best he could to put out a product that would continue to be an attractive one and give them the opportunity to come together as they had been for so many years before.
Now, your book introduces us to a lot of different characters that were instrumental in keeping the team alive and being able to keep that small town connection going. Could you share just one example of one of these individuals and how they got involved in being able to keep the Muck Dogs operational?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many colorful ones. I mean, that was one of the reasons I chose to do the book, is when Bill began to kind of take me around and introduce me to people, I thought to myself, man, these are just, first of all, they're just really nice, kind, welcoming people, always important. But they also just all had such interesting stories of their own. I think Bill I don't know if this was a quote that Bill was quoting or if this was a quote that he came up with. I'm not sure. He's a writer, so he may have very well come up with it himself. But he said, every human being is a novel. We just don't take time to read them all. But, in other words, everyone has their own special story if you take the time to learn it. And that's kind of what I discovered with meeting these people. And I guess two of the examples that quickly come to mind are, Betsy and Ginny, who are two women from Buffalo, which is about 45 minutes to the west of Batavia. And neither of them were sports fans, which is what's so funny, of any other sport. But Betsy got brought to a minor league game 3 or 4 years ago, and she said she just immediately fell in love with it. So Jenny had been her best friend. And so she said, Jenny, hey, would you like to come to one of these games with me? And one thing led to another. Now they're season ticket holders. They, drive from Buffalo together, 30 times a summer to go to these games in Batavia. So that's one great example. Yeah. I mean, there's plenty more. Bill Kaufman, his parents, it's often multi-generational, grandparents, their parents and the grandchildren all together in the bleachers. It really was wonderful.
One of the things I think we forget and overlook is how critical these minor league teams can be to the economic and social fabric of small towns. Can you talk about how the Muck Dogs were so important to Batavia and how keeping them was so critical just in that particular instance?
Yeah. I think it's important on a number of levels. I think part of it is just sort of the abstract level of there was this magical connection between your small town and these major cities, so for example, like in the Appalachian League story, Pulaski, Virginia, a pretty remote, small place. But when they had the Pulaski Yankees, the minor league affiliate, there was those guys were wearing Yankee pinstripes, and there was a direct pipeline from this little town in the mountains of Western Virginia to the Bronx, where Babe Ruth once played. And they felt, it made them kind of special. There's not a lot of other things in Pulaski, that are sort of national, that would be nationally recognized, but they had this special claim, on baseball through their connection to the Yankees. And same thing with Batavia with their affiliates. So that's kind of the more the spiritual connection, so to speak. As far as the reality of what it brings to them on a daily basis, it provides them an opportunity to come together with their friends and their neighbors, every night. It's very different from the major leagues where it's so expensive and logistically difficult. People, except for a handful of season ticket holders, most people don't go to 80 games a summer. They might go to a handful. Whereas here, it's routine that, season tickets are $99. And most of the people live within walking distance of the stadium, and so they just get together with the same sort of crew, and it's what they do, and they enjoy it, and it provides kind of a sense of, I think, camaraderie and brotherhood that is unique, and that they certainly didn't want to lose.
I think one of the things that really spoke to me reading your book, Will, was just how important minor league baseball teams are to small towns. And in thinking about, which a lot of fans may not even realize, Major League Baseball is actively considering more cuts to minor league teams. They're handing over control to private equity groups over this small town control. What are some of the factors that you found that are driving this shift?
Mm-hmm. I think there's two of them that are probably the predominant reasons. One is just to save money, which I think is kind of crazy when you think about it, because they're really only saving about $700,000, a year for the teams that they're getting rid of, and that's one major league minimum salary. And you're talking about a league now where individual players are making close to $1 billion. There's $750 million contracts. There's players who are making over $200,000 a game. Yep. So, if Bryce Harper or Francisco Lindor play 3 games, that would float one of these teams for an entire season. So they're saving money, but do they really, the money's there if they wanted to keep these teams alive. The other part, this part is a more convincing argument. I still don't completely subscribe to it, but the other thing I think that Major League Baseball would tell you would be, or at least some people, they're not even in complete agreement on this, but the proponents of contraction would say this whole system of talent evaluation is antiquated and unnecessary. We don't, with technology today and with analytics, we don't need 160 teams, spread across the country playing, 80 games a summer to determine who are the best, handful of players that are going to make the major leagues. We can just put them, it's more efficient and cheaper just to send a fraction of them down to a combine in Arizona or Florida, a spring training complex, hook them up to all the kinds of different monitors and figure out what the spin rates and launch angles and all these things are. And we don't need kind of this old school scout in the bleachers in Batavia, New York, to watch a game every night of the summer to tell us these answers. I think there's probably a little more truth to that argument. I still think that a lot of scouts would tell you there is value in real games, and there is real value in the gut instinct of what someone who has spent their life studying the game will tell you, as opposed to what a computer will tell you. But that would probably be the other argument that MLB people would tell you as far as why it's not necessary to have all these teams.
So what's your case for preserving the small town mom and pop connection of minor league teams and these small areas across the country?
Well, I think a few things. I think what those scouts said is partly true. I don't think I don't totally subscribe to the idea that this is totally replaceable and unnecessary. But and I also, like I said, I think the money is there. It's a kind of an inconsequential amount of money in the big picture. But I think the most important reason would be that Major League Baseball has always held itself up as sort of transcending business. They're the national pastime. They're not making widgets or tires or something. And so I found it a little bit disingenuous for them to market themselves using kind of these Norman Rockwell images of Americana and the dad playing catch with the son in a cornfield, and sort of embodying these classic American values, and then running themselves like the most sort of cynical profit-driven organization imaginable, and so there's a disconnect there. I mean, they're obviously entitled to do whatever they want. It's a free country. It's a capitalist society. They can spend it however they see fit. But if you're going to do that, then it kind of takes a lot of gall to also purport to be something different and special. So that would be kind of my response. I would prefer that they held themselves to a little bit of a different standard, since that's the way they've been presenting themselves for so long.
It's a great point. What are some of the challenges that small towns like Batavia have outside of the MLB exploring and giving these, private firms the ownership? What can small towns do to try to be able to keep a grasp on these teams? Where are the challenges that they face?
Well, it's going to be tough. I think they've done the best they could in this instance to rally behind this new team. But I don't think there's any denying the fact that the product on the field has degraded. The quality of the players is not the same as it was with the minor leagues. Now, but it still fulfills that important function of a place where people can come together and find happiness, in an affordable fashion. So, I mean, I think it's that what they have now is certainly better than nothing, but I still think that something has been lost. And I think, the financial headwinds could be tough. So far it's working. But how viable is this for the long term economically? I mean, the margins for minor league sports are notoriously thin, and you kind of dilute the quality a little bit. Is it really going to last? I don't know. I certainly hope it does. And the fans and the community there are doing the best they can to keep it. But, we'll have to see, I guess.
Going back to the residents of Batavia with the Muck Dogs, has that been a case study to show how small towns can still operate and support teams of, either if it's collegiate or minor league level? Is there something that can be learned from this experience?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, so far they have really embraced it. But again, I think you have to ask, was part of that just the result of they didn't have baseball for almost 2 years with the COVID shutdown, and then losing their team. So kind of like, they were probably desperate for just to go to a ball game, which helped with, attendance for those first few years. Can that be sustained? I think Robbie's doing the absolute best he can to put out the best product he can to keep that, to maintain that. But again, it kind of it remains to be seen. I think if it will last. But right now, everyone seems to be rallying and doing the best they can to make it work.
If you had to make a prediction, Will, do you think the future of baseball is going to stay in small town America, or is just going to be a slow decline? What's your prediction? What's your hope?
Well, my hope and my prediction, let's see, I don't know if they necessarily align. Obviously, I hope that it does. I think it's a tremendous, civic asset, these teams, what they bring to these communities, especially in today's, very sort of toxic political climate where everyone's kind of at each other's throat. It's so healthy to have a place where you can put that aside and just come together with your neighbors, that you may not agree with in any number of other ways. You can all agree that, it's fun to sit in the bleachers and cheer for the Muck Dogs. So I hope it does. Do I think it? I think it will. I mean, I think baseball has survived hard times before.
Sure.
I think, as long as there are people out there that want it, and they still do, they'll find a way to make it work. So, I am concerned about what the future looks like for minor league baseball in particular. But, I think I am optimistic that places will be resourceful and do the best they can to fill that hole, to the best of their ability. I don't think it makes it right, but I think that at least hopefully some good will come of it. Put it that way.
Absolutely. Will, where can people pick up a copy of your book? It comes out on March 11th, 2025. How can people get their version?
Oh, I would encourage them to do that. They can do so, obviously, we love to support local bookstores. So if you have a local independent bookstore, ask for them to carry it. A lot of them I know will be carrying it. If they don't, I'm sure they'd be happy to order it for you. Barnes & Noble should be carrying it. And then, of course, Amazon, if that's the only option. It's available right now, actually, as we speak, for pre-sale on Amazon, and any one of those, I'd be very gratified if your listeners were to pick up a copy, and I do think that they would enjoy it.
And how can my audience further connect with you? They pick up a copy of the book. They may have a question, want to connect with you further. How could they do that?
Sure. Well, I have formerly Twitter, now X account. It's just at W Bardenwerper, and I'm reasonably active on there. And then just go to my website, www.willbardenwerper.com, and there's a link there that you can contact me, and I do read all those messages. I mean, that's how I wrote the book, is I got a message from Bill Kaufman telling me to come to Batavia, and the next thing I knew, I was writing a book about it. So I read the messages. I'm always thrilled to hear from people, and I would certainly encourage anyone who's curious to reach out, and I'd be glad to get in touch.
And you've written a book previous to this about Saddam Hussein, correct?
Yep, very, very different subject matter, about the guards who were tasked with, or the American soldiers tasked with guarding him in the days leading up to his execution, and these peculiar relationships that developed where they kind of felt, despite themselves, they kind of grew to like him, even though they recognized he was a terrible human being, guilty of all of the things that we know he was guilty of. But the older man that they got to know in the prison cell, was a very charming and sort of just displayed a different side of his personality that is less well known. And so it just tells the story of the conflicted feelings they had when they ultimately had to deliver him to the gallows, knowing that he was a terrible person, but also kind of having grown to like him a little bit.
And what's next for you now that you have this next book coming out? Do you have anything in the plans?
That's a good question. Well, maybe one of your readers can write to me and give me an idea like this one.
Yeah, there you go.
But no, I'm working with my editor. I'm always on the lookout for the next good story. And we have some ideas kind of that we're batting around, but haven't yet, homed in on one in particular.
And you're a New York Mets fan, is that correct?
I am. Although as I mentioned in the book, my feelings towards MLB are a little bit more conflicted now, which really stunk because I'm a lifelong baseball fan and I love baseball, and I've always been a passionate fan, and it kind of stinks to be less enthused when you kind of see behind the curtain at how some of these business decisions are made. But yeah, I am a Mets fan, and despite all of this, I'll still hope. I'll still be rooting for them.
Do you have a prediction for the upcoming season for the Mets? How do you think they're going to do?
That's it's even bigger than it's a very lot of dollar signs behind that question with Steve Cohen, owning the team now. I mean, they got an explosive lineup. They have a lot of star power. What gets me worried, is nowadays with, these short playoff series is, if you don't have sort of one or two ace lockdown pitchers that are going to just shut the other team down, it's a gamble. I grew up an Oriole fan, and they're kind of the same. They have this star-studded young lineup that puts up a lot of runs, rolls through the regular season, and then they just routinely get bounced in the first round of the playoffs. They get shut out in two games. They lose, and that's it. So I think the Mets are good. I think the Orioles are good. But I wish both of those teams had a few pitchers that you can put them out there, like Verlander back in the day, and you just know that he's going to lock them down. And I don't think either of them have that right now.
That was as a Red Sox fan, my biggest excitement over the offseason once they got Crochet from Chicago, because finally, you've got a guy with lockdown potential in the starting rotation. I agree with everything you just said.
Yeah.
Final question, Will. Who's winning the World Series this year?
You know what? Despite everything I just said, you can go with your heart or go with your brain. So I am gonna go and like I said, I was an Oriole fan growing up, and so I'm gonna say the Orioles. That's gonna be my pick.
All right, folks, you heard it here first from Will Bardenwerper. The title of his book is Homestand, Small Town Baseball and the Fight for the Soul of America. Comes out on March 11, 2025. Will, thanks for taking time to come on the show.
No, thank you. I really appreciate it.